Hey everyone, my name is Eric and I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Fund, and welcome to today's session, which is called Marketing Tactics for D2C. All right, so let me first start with an awkward confession, and here it is. The confession is that I actually do not like investing in D2C businesses. Now, it's not to say that we haven't done it before. We actually have companies in the Hustle Fund portfolio that are D2C or direct-to-consumer businesses as well. And it's not to even say that direct-to-consumer businesses are bad. I mean, there's many examples of businesses that have scaled up, become huge going concerns, and it's certainly on trend for where the market is going. I actually shop at a lot of D2C businesses myself. But the problem is that it's very rare to find founders who have mastered this trifecta of skills that I think are necessary to run a D2C successfully. It's like a combination of a mastery of brand building skill, performance marketing skill, and like retention skill, so that your users keep shopping with you over and over again. But it turns out that every once in a while we run into a master of all three of these skills. And today's guest, Noura Sakkijha, who's the co-founder and CEO of Mejuri, is one of those rare unicorn founders who seem to figure it all out. So we're really excited to speak with her, and I am going to cue her in a moment. But before I do so, we need to first recognize that today's session is actually made possible only from the ongoing support of our awesome sponsors, NetSuite. So I wanted to just spend a couple seconds describing NetSuite to you. So the direct-to-consumer revolution has changed a lot about the way consumer products companies do business, with brands like Mejuri skipping the middleman and marketing directly to their consumers. The need for proper visibility and customer data has taken on a new level of importance. That's why early stage product companies trust NetSuite to deliver real-time visibility into consumer behavior, financials, sales data, and more, so they can connect with their customers in a more efficient and meaningful manner. Built-in KPIs, customizable dashboards, and consolidated reporting are all included in NetSuite's single cloud-based platform to give you the power to scale your D2C business and focus on new marketing campaigns. To learn more, please visit netsuite.com. I've mentioned this in the past. A lot of our own Hustle Fund portfolio companies are happy NetSuite users, so please check them out. And thank you, NetSuite, for all your help in supporting this series. So here is the quick agenda that we are going to cover today. You can see it's quite light. I'm not going to talk about myself. We're going to talk about Noura. We're going to then quickly move into some Q&A that we have prepared to understand some of the early days of her business, how she thinks about marketing, brand, and company building. And we're going to do our best to also reserve time at the very end to answer your questions. So if you have questions, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom panel where you can input what you're thinking. We have our awesome head of marketing here, Kara. Actually, I think our awesome head of product is here too today, Mike, who is going to help to look through some of your questions, answer the ones that they can answer on their own, but bring them up for a live Q&A at the very end. Okay, so enough about all that block and tackling stuff. Let me quickly introduce Noura and get into the Q&A with her. So Noura, as I mentioned, is the co-founder and CEO of Mejuri. It's a direct-to-consumer jewelry company that's raised $28 million in funding, although I will point out that a lot of their growth was done via bootstrapping, which is incredible. Noura was early to the D2C game. She and her co-founder husband started the company in 2015 when direct-to-consumer businesses were popping up all over the place, but not in the jewelry space yet. So now with a waitlist of over 70,000 people, a cult-like following that boasts celebrities like Oprah, you might have heard of her, Kendall Jenner, and Selena Gomez. That's crazy. And a repeat purchase rate of 30%. It's clear that Noura and her team have cracked the code to D2C marketing. Noura, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to hear your journey, and we're excited to dig into Mejuri as well. So actually, thank you. And so my first, it's such a pleasure. And by the way, I'll mention that Noura is really good friends with Elizabeth, one of our co-founders at Hustle Fund. And, over the last 4 years, Elizabeth has just been raving over and over again how great and talented your team is. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. So maybe we can, in your words, why don't we start with learning about what is Mejuri and what is your mission?
So Mejuri, like you said, is a direct-to-consumer fine jewelry brand, and we're set out to redefine luxury essentially by changing the narrative around fine jewelry from being this exclusive gifting category that is typically marketed for men to buy for women. And what we're doing is we're unlocking the barriers for women and for people essentially to buy jewelry for themselves. And some of the pillars that we really focus on is product quality, the brand, as well as ethical production.
So, from what I understand your story, I heard that you come from actually a jewelry background, that your family actually was in this space for quite some time, not as D2C brands, but when you decided to form Mejuri, what made you think that D2C was going to be the path to do so? Because that wasn't very obvious as like the right path back in 2016.
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up I'm a third generation. So my father is a jeweler, my grandfather is a jeweler. So you can imagine it's something that I've always been around and I'm super passionate about it. But it also gave me an insider view growing up on how the jewelry industry works. Things that I love about it is the intricate details of production, the gemstones. But like I said, what I didn't necessarily love about it is how, traditional the positioning is. The designs were very high price points. Very classic and very gifting focused. And so that pushed us to think of creating a direct to consumer brand for women to buy jewelry for themselves. And that essentially dictates, what type of jewelry we produce. So everything that has to do with design the brand around women buying for themselves, the product design and the pricing strategy is also based on that, and creating a community. So what D2C means is you're essentially, as everyone knows, removing middlemen from the process. So say in production, we don't have any middlemen. We work directly with the factories and then we sell directly to our consumers. So we don't have to mark up the wholesale markups that other brands would do in order to sell in other retailers. So we own our sales channels. So what this essentially means is we control our quality with the best manufacturers, but we sell directly to consumers at a price that is competitive compared to other companies. And then we also own our relationship with the customers, because the landscape was missing also the connection in terms of a brand. There were a lot of mom and pop shops, and there's a lot of very high end brands, and we wanted to create a brand, and a brand also means connection with customers.
Oh man, there's so much to unpack there. But there's one more question I had around like these early days of these decisions that you made. So you made the contrarian choice to go D2C so early in the inception of Mejuri, but I don't know if a lot of folks in this audience who are familiar with the brand know you're based in Toronto. I would think of jewelry and fashion as being a New York thing or an LA thing, but I think you chose to remain where your roots are. Can you tell us if there was like a real decision-making process around like, do we need to be located here even though we're an online brand?
I mean, we're an online brand. We have investors and we have operations in the United States, but online means you're global. You can reach your customers at any point. And so we found great talent. We started the company here, and it was much easier for us to scale here while we also scale our office in New York. So it was to be honest, more of a convenience and where we started. And a lot of our market is in the United States. So we're neighbors and it's easy.
That's so great. I mean, certainly cost of living is different from like in LA or New York to Toronto, as well as I guess cost of operations for salaries and so forth. That must be very different. But it's exciting to see that, global fashion brands can really be started anywhere. It's not to say that Toronto is just any random town, but I think this is like one of the cool opportunities for some of the audience members there. If you're also thinking about, do I need to be in one of these epicenters for my industry?
Yeah, exactly. And I think with COVID, we're all learning that there's a lot of work that you can do work through Zoom, you can scale, you can still continue operations. And I think, you're absolutely right. It's not something that should hinder people from starting or growing a business.
Yeah. Well, okay. I want to go back in time a little bit. So the year is now 2015. Okay. We're like going back in time, like Barack Obama is still president and like other things are happening like that. And, so it's the early days. You have background and edge in terms of understanding the jewelry industry, the jewelry supply chain. Like for sure, that's like a cool and killer edge. but it's day one, right? And you're starting to think about brand and marketing channels. How did you go about prioritizing which channels to invest into? And ultimately, what did you pick?
Yeah, so one of the key things in day one is I was able to convince very smart people to come join me on this journey,
Mm,
and they have specializations that are very different from mine. So we had our CTO, we had our chief creative officer, and my partner is also was more on the business development portion. So we all had complementary skills, but obviously we're all starting on day one. So where do we start? One key thing that I think is really, really important for building a brand is really to focus on building a brand, which means you can't buy your way into people's, hearts and minds. And essentially you have to really understand what do you stand for, and how am I going to create the brand around this, and how am I going to be consistent with this. So that was a key component for us from a brand standpoint. But from a marketing standpoint, to answer your question, we ran, you have to think of your company also, take some technology, I guess. When you build technology businesses, there's a lot of experimentation that goes into building these businesses to figure out what works, what doesn't work, a lot of A/B tests. And I think that same methodology should be applied no matter what. And so we had an experimentation spreadsheet of how do we want to reach our customers, whether be it, and we focused on staying diversified. So we had email, for example. How are we going to grow this list, and how are we going to, so brand partnerships or sweeps or whatever that may be. And then we had influencer marketing as a core component as well that we started on with it very early on. And so, we've done a bunch of diversified channels, and we've tried different campaigns or different ways to gain traction in different channels. So, and some will fail, and that's okay, and some will be positive. But the key point here is I don't think you can put 100% into one channel. I think you really need to be diversified. And I think you need to try different tactics and put KPIs for each channel to figure out how am I going to get closer to success.
So no doubt there's some consumer products D2C founders out here in today's audience, just to try to save them a little time. But I hear you loud and clear, which is, it sounds like you can't assume that any single channel is going to be your performer. You need to just experiment with it. All that said, though, was there like a clear winner in the early days that was beginning to manifest, like when you're running these experiments?
In the early days, I would say when I say we focused on brand, and we focused on creating partnerships with influencers online to contextualize our products, and we focused on email marketing and brand partnerships. We did not focus on paid marketing at all because
wow.
it was we actually started paid marketing 3 years into the business. So we really focused heavily on how do we build a community, and how do we create brand partnerships with brands that are very similar to us. So never compromise, obviously, or never change your brand messaging. So brands that target similar community that you're building, or influencers who really love your product and believe in what you're doing. These are steps in contextualizing the brand through genuine channels. And once you start to feel there's product market fit, and there's people coming back, and things are sort of progressing positively, that's when I believe focusing on paid makes sense. But prior to that, when you're not super solid, or you're still building the blocks of your brand, and you're still building your assortment, I think it's really key to think of partnerships more.
So this is really fascinating. And the thing that actually is kind of blowing me away is I want to sort of talk about the brand building part of it. So just to emphasize in my introduction again, Mejuri for a very long time raised extremely little capital, and we're essentially bootstrapping for several years as they're doing brand building activities. When I think about brand building activities, I kind of think about the holidays of like 2019 when I'd go to a movie theater and then I see polar bears drinking Coca-Cola right before the movie starts. And I'm like, oh man, Coke must have spent like another $70 million, right? To do this really wonderful brand building stuff. I always love those commercials. And, but like, as like essentially a bootstrapper founder, executing brand, it seems almost like contravailing of just like, doesn't that like require a bunch of money in order to like grow brand? And like, it seems almost like less practical than maybe like going direct to consumer performance marketing. So can you tell us a little bit more about this influencer marketing world that you're breaking into? how did you think about breaking into this? Back in 2015, by the way, I don't think there was a term for influencer marketing.
Yeah.
So how did you even realize that this is going to work, or was it going to be worth your investment?
So I'll tell you how I think about brand and next generation brand in general, and what is the scope of that in my mind. So brand is obviously the connection that you create with someone, but this is based on, we have to know what are our values, what's the brand identity, what do we stand for, what are we not, and how do we consistently post after post, communication after communication, what's our tone of voice, that we remain consistent and super strong. It's not really a big campaign that you put out there or a big billboard. So it starts off with, who are we, what do we stand for, what is the brand identity, and how am I going to demonstrate this with depth, one step after the other. So that's sort of on the outside. On the inside, what is really key for us, and we knew from day one, is creating a product, a good quality product at an affordable price, is not a value proposition. This is an expectation, right? So this is what should be there. So we really have to focus on creating the best assortment. But then how are you going to deliver on it? In my opinion, this is part of brand. So this is how you're creating also a relationship with customers. So that includes your supply chain, and that includes your customer service and your fulfillment. So all of the infrastructure that no one talks about potentially when we're talking about brands is really part of building your brand. I used to obsess about a single negative customer experience, for example, in the early days. I want to fix it. I want to make it better. And this became actually a very, very important part of who we are right now, and really, really focus on making sure our customers are happy. We're really focused on creating a compressed supply chain that allows us to be nimble, that allows us to be on trend, but also be the authority in our design. So these infrastructures that no one really maybe talks about early on, I think are really huge contributors to that consistency that I talk about, in terms of how are you delivering your brand consistently to the customer, so that you create that trust element for them to come back.
Okay, so I'm obsessed with this brand. I got one more brand question for you. And by the way, our chat is blowing up. You've made hundreds of new fans right now. It's really exciting to see what folks are contributing. Thank you everyone for questions too, and we will reserve time to get to them. So early days, influencer marketing, you had this insight that was very, very early, just across D2C generally, but also especially in your industry probably. And brand, to me, when I describe it to someone, feels very fluffy, right? Again, it's like fluffy polar bears drinking Coca-Cola. It's just like, well, that's nice, and it gives me a warm feeling inside. I'm not sure how it's going to translate into Coke sales. So was there a set of measurements that you guys were able to figure out to discern whether your brand marketing efforts were actually working in the early days?
Yeah, and it's funny that you say, so I'm an engineer by background, and my business partner, our chief creative officer, we both together are super complementary. And so we talk about this all the time. And so the work that goes into brand is fascinating. Our creative team is one of our largest teams, actually. But to answer your question, this starts coming up with your organic traffic. So for example, in the early days, you want your brand to grow through organic and word of mouth, because that is a healthy metric, as opposed to buying, obviously, ads. Because then, ads is very important for you to scale. But in the beginning, you want to make sure your customers are telling each other about your brand. So organic traffic, organic acquisition is really, really key for you to determine how your brand is resonating with your customers. And then it's a mix of art and science. Not everything is a one-to-one relationship. It's our engagement of the community, the engagement of people. Do they understand who we are? Is it easy to describe the brand? These are really important metrics that we look at. But I would say primarily organic and retention are key metrics to look at.
So, we were talking a lot about influencers just now, but actually before today's session, I was on Instagram and I looked for Mejuri on there, and I saw tons and tons and tons and tons of people posting their and modeling your jewelry. How do you think about user-generated content? And is there like an intentional part of that strategy?
Yeah, so like you said, in the early days in 2015, when it was probably a lot smaller of a strategy, we started. And the key thing we did early on is our marketing team is in-house, technology. That's another thing about us. Technology is in-house, creative is in-house, marketing is in-house, even logistics. So everything is internal, so we can control the customer experience. But our marketing team who was working on these relationships was in-house, meaning that we have started these relationships, nurtured them, and genuinely started partnerships with these influencers. And some of them are still with us since the beginning. So we've never outsourced these functions, and we've never looked at it as a transactional process. And it's more of who believes in the brand, who loves the brand. And it's not about the number of followers, and it's not about who follows them. It's more about, do they love the brand? Are they genuinely interested in us? And this is how we now gauge who we work with. And the whole, for me, I love this because it contextualizes the product across many different people with different walks of life, different backgrounds, different genders. It's really exciting to see inclusivity also through user-generated content. So these are really key, aspects of how we show the brand on different walks of life. And that's why I love influencer marketing.
Okay, so when it comes to user-generated content in particular, so like I'm a guy who has 300 followers on Instagram. So I'm a huge influencer amongst my 300 friends, basically, and my mom. And I'm modeling some cool rings I bought from you. Is there like a process where your team like collects, organizes, and publishes? Like this seems like so much data to ingest. And I don't know if there's like any processes that you guys have figured out for UJC.
Yeah, so we from an early, so there's specific metrics we look at in terms of percentages of engagement, but outside of that, we also use, so there is a fine crew component. So essentially influencers who work with us and as more on, call it affiliate. I don't love this term, but think of it as an term. And there's also others who are more of user-generated content and are just wearing our products. There isn't necessarily, we've tried different tools, quite frankly, but we just found a way to figure out how to grow our list and how to maintain relationships. And we're not using anything quite, completely different or customized. It's really about relationship management. And we have dedicated people on the team who are doing that, essentially.
I see. Very cool. I by the way, Kara's just been pinging me saying like we have so many questions. We got to get to the Q&A pretty soon. So to the folks who are listening, we will get to your questions soon. I'll probably wrap this up on my end very soon. But I got to talk about two more things. Okay, the first is this, which is retention. 30% repeat purchases. So, okay, I'll share a story. Like I bought a wedding ring from Blue Nile for my wife over a decade ago. Yeah. And then sadly her rings got stolen. And then I waited really long. And then 11 years later, I actually went to Blue Nile again. I bought her the same ring. And I started thinking about this. I was like, doesn't that make me like a horrible customer to someone? Like I like went away for over a decade before I came back. And when I think about the jewelry space, I'm like, there's so much noise there in terms of consumers. Like, how the heck did you figure like to achieve this repeat rate? Like, what's the secret here?
So one of the key things is we're not really, for example, selling engagement rings like traditional engagement rings. And so you're right. That's not something that you would repeat, or hope not, repeat quite often. But one of the key things is how do we, we create jewelry for people to wear every single day. So this is something that they style, like they think of their shoes and their bags. But how do we bring people back is a mix of things. One key thing is we pioneered the drop model in fine jewelry. And I do believe it's a little bit of a contributor to keeping things fresh. What a drop model means is every single week we're introducing new products. It doesn't mean we introduce a lot more than other companies, but it means we take the introductions and we divide them on a weekly basis. So there are 1 to 3 pieces that are introduced on a weekly basis. And so that enables us to really understand what works, what doesn't work. But it also allows us to continuously create fresh content and continuously go back to our customers with something new. So whether be it, you want to create new products, may not be the way for everyone. It could be fresh content, but more frequently so that you have something to talk about and connect with your community. And it's not only always about the product, there's, the values of the brand. And so being that fresh in our assortment, that fresh in our content is really, really key. And then foundationally, it goes back to creating that trust. So the whole infrastructure that I talked about and really striving to create, doing our best to create the best possible or turning negative situations into positive situations. So these key moments are very important. Is trust is basic, and then frequency of content and freshness of that. are really key things to bring people back. And in our industry, we're changing the way people look at jewelry. It's not an occasional purchase. It's not a gift. It's not something you aspire to. Instead of buying fashion jewelry, come and buy fine jewelry that stays with you forever. So that's a different story, changing consumer behavior.
Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Okay, I have one more question, and I swear we'll move on to the Q&A for folks who've been contributing. Thank you so much for your patience and for listening to Noura Sakkijha, the co-founder and CEO of Mejuri. So you got this giant wait list. I think I said 70,000 introduction. Actually, Kara's mentioning to me that it might be closer to 100,000 or more. It doesn't matter what the number is. It's huge. What is the strategy behind this wait list? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one key component so we don't mass produce products, and especially in fine jewelry, you have a lot of craftsmanship that goes into it. And with the Monday drop model, it means that we introduce relatively smaller batches, and essentially when they for example, yesterday we launched an LA dome ring that went above expectations in terms of and we sold out. And we sold out. We obviously didn't buy for one day. However, it exceeded our expectations. And so we're very conscious of how much we invest in inventory, because we obviously don't want to end up we don't mass produce. So smaller batches that we craft them, they land, and based on the consumer appetite, they essentially get bought based on that. And sometimes we under forecast. And in these instances, the products go into wait lists. And we just launched our men's line, similar, we under forecasted because it's a brand new launch. And so it went into sold out very quickly. But I'd rather have a conscious production or responsible production volumes that protects the inventory, also protects us from holding a lot of inventory. And so that way, with our compressed supply chain that I mentioned earlier, we're able to take these risks with smaller batches because we can replenish relatively quickly. So that's the essence of the wait list. And so when demand exceeds our expectations.
So here's what I've just distilled out of this strategy, which is essentially you've figured out a way of engineering FOMO for each of your drops. I hope that people who are building consumer products, D2C businesses are listening about this strategy. It's ingenious, right? Because I would feel such incredible time pressure to make a decision, right? When these drops happen, knowing that they're in limited quantity. Wow, this is so cool. Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually, Noura, I want to give you the last word here before we get into the Q&A. Is there any other takeaway about some of the early days of your business, things that you learned that I think would be helpful before we jump into some of the direct questions?
To be honest, I think maybe from an early stage standpoint, I always say you're not going to know everything. And I think for me, half of the battle was showing up every single day and trying different things and trying and really being there with the team and trying different things to see what works. And I think, early stage can be quite lonely. It can be tough, but I think that if you truly believe in what you're doing, just keep trying and figure out what works.
That's right. Okay. Well, I think we are ready to transition over to the audience Q&A portion of today's event. Kara, I see you unmuting yourself, putting your video back on. Anything interesting happening in Q&A right now?
So much interesting stuff. I have to admit that often with these events, we get so many questions that I have to dig through and only pick out the best ones. And I have this little note card where I write down the ones that I think we should focus on. And I have just been writing down every single question, which is not effective at all. But because they're all so, I think, relevant and good. So I'm going to dive in, Noura. We'll get through as many as we can. One thing that I really do want to touch on before we dive into some more of the marketing tactics is around what you're doing. Given early on, you talk about, you can build a business remote right now. You can run a business remotely right now. But your team is sizable. And what I'm really curious about is how are you managing to continue to build a great team company culture, given that people are stuck at home and not able to engage with one another face to face?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because we were the type of company that loves to run events and be together, and there's something happening all the time. And we operated like a big family. But I think at this point, there's been a lot of investment in communication points. So for example, we have a weekly leadership meeting, we have a bi-weekly executive, and then you have Every Monday we have an all hands, and then every month we have a steering, an AMA, Ask Me Anything, and a town hall. So there's always FaceTime with the entire team, and there's opportunities, and it's not a one-way conversation with the AMA, for example, which is my favorite part. The team gets to submit questions that they're curious about, and especially you want to open up the dialogue in these conditions to really understand what's going on. So that happens on a monthly basis, and every single month I commit to answering every single question. We also have engagement surveys, obviously, that run. So earlier in COVID, when we started going from 100% in the office to lockdown, we had a bi-weekly pulse survey, and then it now got switched back to a quarterly survey. And so this also helps us understand what's going on, what are people, what do people want more of or less of, etc. And, with the recent also changes, we have an Inclusivity and Diversity Committee that was launched, and also reaching out to people. So there's a lot of work that's been done also for mental health. Anyways, this is a very big topic that I love to talk about. I love team culture. We've been conscious of our culture since we started, and we have values that we talk about in terms of leadership and core values of the business that we really protect, and we do performance reviews based on these values. But primarily, my number one advice is continue to push managers to conduct meaningful one-on-ones and thoughtful one-on-ones with their direct reports, and then continue to have these talking points, whether it be at town halls or all hands, etc.
That's great advice. And you mentioned just now that you have been working on this since day one. So I'm curious just to dig into that a little bit more. Early on, the team was obviously very small to start. Yeah. So were you starting some of these initiatives when you only had like 3 or 5 or 10 people?
Yeah. So for example, we've had values since the beginning about positivity, and we're all one, and a lot of us were generalists, and so we're doing a lot of different things, and we're one family, so it felt like that. But one-on-ones, for example, and structures like that, and an open environment has been there since day one. So we've always made sure there's two-way communication happening.
Great practice. This is something I see a lot of our founders struggle with, is how do I prioritize this when I'm building the business? Seems like baking it in from day one is a good way to make sure that doesn't slip as you get bigger and that stuff becomes more critical.
You can't build a business without an amazing team. So they are a big investment.
Yep. Oh man, put that on a poster and just put that all over the world, I feel like. Okay, we have some questions around your early hiring. One is, did you have a marketing partner as one of your first hires, or even as almost like a co-founder role, or when did you bring that person in?
Honestly, we were all doing marketing. However, one of our early hires in terms of an employee who joined was in the first year of the business, for sure, and they were focused on partnerships primarily.
Oh, okay. And actually, there are a lot of questions about partnerships as well. So I'm going to diverge just a little from hiring. What are some partnerships that you focused on? Like, how did you think about partnerships in the early days? Not just influencer marketing, but you mentioned partnerships when you were talking to Eric at the beginning of the conversation. What kinds of partnerships did that look like? And can you go into a little bit of detail about what worked and what didn't work?
Yeah, so some of the partnerships I would, some brand partnerships. So for example, if you're aligned with a set of brands and it's a mutual kind of beneficial partnership, it would be a cross promotion, for example, on Instagram, or it would be number of brands would join forces and would send a sweeps email to their lists to ensure that, that we're telling our community about this brand and they're telling their community about our brand, and everyone would join into the sweeps. So these are smaller partnerships that you can do with like-minded brands. Again, they have to be obviously similar to your target audience. And partnerships also, influencer partnerships would be one of them. But I would say outside of that is brands.
Okay. I mean, early on, it seemed like you had your mission pretty well defined, that you wanted Mejuri to be a brand that was allowing women, enabling and empowering women to buy jewelry for themselves, and jewelry that they could wear every single day forever. So how did you find like-minded brands that aligned with that? Was it really just sitting in a room and just brainstorming with your team, or was there research?
It's a brainstorming. D2C was really accelerating at that point. So there were a lot of direct-to-consumer brands who are doing similar higher quality products to the similar audience. You can even look at what are the companies that are getting funded, for example, so that you understand their scale. So you look at VC portfolio companies. But through the network, just by being an operator, you just hear of companies in other disciplines and you just essentially cold email them or cold call them or try to establish a partnership. Say, no hacks in there. You just have to try to establish partnerships, create a win-win. And it was a big component of getting the word out there.
Can we talk about that a little bit more though? Just because in day one, today you probably get lots of cold emails for like partnerships, right? And it's easy to get a little cynical of like, who the heck is this person? What was it like to overcome, I guess, that hurdle in the beginning?
I think it's important to also set expectations as to the size of the company that you're partnering with. To create a win-win, it has to be a similar size of company, right? Because otherwise it would be a very different win-win with a larger company. So I think that was key for us to really understand similar stage companies who are looking for similar things and have similar values, which obviously would narrow down your selection. But you can't go to, if you're just starting out, to go to a much larger company, you haven't still proven, for example, product market fit to try to establish that partnership. It's doable if you have something that is very unique, but your chances, if you want to, get a yes and move forward with this, is to look for like-minded and similar size companies, I would say.
I imagine that this is a huge mistake that people make from day one, which is like, I got this great company and I'm going to reach out to Oprah now and see if we can set up a partnership. It's just too asymmetric, it feels like. This is such a great
time
place.
For sure. Yeah.
And did you find that it was also best to work with one partner at a time? Or did you lump, like if you're doing a sweeps, is it best to partner just one or multiple?
It depends on the message. It depends on the price. It really, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. It really depends. We've done both early on and both worked well. So it depends on your partner and what you're offering and the size. So if the size is very small of every partner, then you might want to do something larger so that it feels also substantial for those who are participating.
Okay, that's really good advice. Okay. Backtracking just a little bit to the early team, I realized we got slightly off track there, but so much to dig into around partnerships. Can you talk a little bit about your first 5 hires on the team?
So we had a founding team member. So my partner and I started it, but then we had our chief creative officer and our CTO join. So I consider them founding team members, and so they were very, very key, and they still here. They're our partners. And then we had the 4 of us, and then we had marketing as well as operations, a manager for operations and a marketing manager as well, and then copywriter. And so that was the initial crew, I would say. And then obviously things grow, and we're about 150 people right now, so it's different. But generally speaking, when I say obviously manager for operations, that's a very general role. And now this person leads our customer experience, so super specialized. But we were all generalists and we were all doing a lot of things together.
And how did you convince those early hires to join you? I mean, now I feel like someone says, hey, do you want to work for Mejuri? Everyone would be like, oh yeah, let me quit my day job here. But in the beginning, when you're relatively unknown, what did that look like?
Honestly, I think I was lucky because we were all of the founding team members have already, worked for 5 to, 7 years, 10 years at that point. And we were all ready to try something, to build something on our own. So I always say, I found crazy people like me, and they were willing to come on the journey. But it was, I would say I was lucky. I know I don't like this answer typically when people say I was lucky, but in this case, I do consider myself lucky to have, found them and to have convinced them to join the business. But I would say we were all in similar stages in our lives in terms of wanting to build something.
Okay, so mission and values, it sounds like we're really critical in finding the right people as well.
Yeah, mission and values, what they're looking for, what they're dreaming of. And then at the end of the day, you want to find someone who's very entrepreneurial, someone who wants to build something, and someone who understands, if this doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. So it's logical for a lot of people.
Yep, I can understand that. I've been that person before, sold on the dream, and I can see that can be really powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so a bunch of other questions here. I'm just sort of organizing my brain a little bit. Okay, a while back we talked a bit about how you drop products to see what works and what doesn't. One question that we have here is, how long do you wait, I guess, to see what the reaction is before making a decision on what to stock more of and what to maybe not focus on?
Yeah. So the Monday drop model, part of it is to see what works, what doesn't work, and part of it is obviously to stay on trend and to make sure that we're relevant from an assortment standpoint. So, it's the art and science components. But then how long? I would say we should be faster, but we wait for weeks, because you introduce this product, and so if it doesn't hit, you want to try to obviously push it through different marketing channels or see really why is it not working. And so I would give it, 4 to 6 weeks at the shortest level. But we can be faster if we need to, but I think it needs to live a little bit. I'm too reluctant on discontinuing very quickly until it has run through a few channels and we've talked to a few people about it.
Earlier, Noura, I asked you a question about in the early days, what were you trying to measure? And I actually want to ask a question of jumping now 5 years ahead of time today. Is there an important set of measures that your teams tracks in terms of core metrics?
Today, I have a gazillion KPIs. So if it's for a specific, is it for a specific area? Which?
Well, let's keep it within the theme of marketing and growth. So, is there a critical few, 2 or 3?
Yes. Yeah. LTV to CAC ratio is something that is really important. You have to look at your CAC at all time, your unit economics, essentially. Those are key metrics. Without your healthy LTV to CAC, you can't really grow the business. And so that goes into, you have to look at your AOV, you have to look at your customer acquisition costs, you have to look at your retention efforts. So these are key metrics. From a product standpoint, your sell-through, the reviews are very key for also to see how the product is being received, the return rate. So these are things. So product is different from marketing, but they're closely tied. But I think from a marketing standpoint, also week over week growth. So something actually a point of advice is don't look at month over month. You have to look at week over week, day over day in the beginning, maybe. So just see how you're trending and not necessarily to wait to look at trends for a longer period of time. So I would say these are the key metrics.
So the way that you're describing some of these key metrics, which by the way is a great answer, kind of reminds me of if I were a Series C investor at Goldman Sachs or something talking to you, and you were kind of have a conversation like this, and I totally get it. But I kind of want to go back to 2015, Noura, as well. And when you're just starting off, were there mentors, by the way, that helped you along the way to figure this stuff out? Because this is we don't get trained in this stuff at school, right?
Yeah, of course. So in the early days, I still looked at week over week growth. I still looked at CAC. I wasn't looking at LTV heavily because obviously we don't have a lot of time to really understand. And I still have the dashboard. I looked at retention rates as well. So these 3 metrics and AOV. These 4 metrics were really key for me. Return rates as well on product. And to answer your question on mentors, I am a big believer in yes. The short answer is yes. And I think so. When we launched, we were part of 500 startups. You can ask Elizabeth. I think I knocked on all doors. I'm the kind of person who likes to learn from others, especially those who have been there, done that. And so up to this point, I still surround myself with a lot of mentors, and I reach out to them if I have a sticky situation, no matter what it is. And I'm also an extrovert, so I like to think out loud, for example. So I like to surround myself with people who I can talk to and really figure things out with them. So this is really key. Find someone who can teach you this stuff. I went to engineering and MBA. I didn't know what CAC is. I didn't know what LTV is. I had nothing and no knowledge about these metrics. And I had to learn them from scratch from other e-com entrepreneurs or people who actually know about these metrics and how to calculate them. and also lots of research and self-learning too.
I think Eric and I just got lost in like, wow, what a great answer. I wasn't even thinking about the question. I just so much.
Well, I guess like it's the thing that is really cool about the story is just like, look, everyone who's listening, like, look how sophisticated Noura and team has become in terms of understanding their business to this nuanced level. But also remember earlier in the conversation when she and all of us were newbies and didn't know any of this stuff, right? So there is hope for you, and there's also help if you can seek it out. So yeah.
I remember one time someone told me, like in the startup world, no one knows anything because everyone is trying to do something new, right? So sometimes you don't even have, no one has done this before. So you really have to try and figure things out for yourself. So, but definitely always have KPIs.
So Noura, obviously you've been at this for a handful of years now. And I think when you started, the D2C industry was relatively new, and certainly in jewelry, D2C brands were limited if there were really any other besides Mejuri. But today the space is a lot more crowded. So for someone starting out right now, 2020, what would you recommend that they do, like in terms of, especially in terms of their early marketing stack, but also just around their strategy to differentiate themselves and compete with with others in the space? And I realize I'm asking that they might be trying to compete with you, and I hope that's not necessarily the case, but without giving away any of your secret sauce.
I mean, market is big enough. It's a very big market, and looking, new entrants means there's exciting opportunities. So we can all grow. In terms of, things that, again, I go back to basics. Don't try to get crazy PR or pay ads before you figured out the ethos of the brand. Saying, fine jewelry at affordable price is not a value proposition. Like, it's the basics. And so really figure out who you are, what's your assortment, what's your differentiating factor, why do you essentially exist, and how am I going to validate this with through partnerships or through customers? Am I getting organic, repeat, word of mouth? Is this clicking or not? And then stay consistent, I think, is really key. But trying to do, ads or copy or that sort of thing of other brands, I think, is short-lived. We've seen our designs, our narrative, everything getting copied, but I don't know that it's a long-lived sort of situation. So I really do think that finding your unique sauce is really important, because the customer will figure this out over time. And so I don't know if that's helpful, but I would just go back to, don't think of spending money on PR and spending money on ads. It could be noise in the beginning and a lot of pressure when you still haven't figured out your assortment, your values, and how you're going to deliver these things to your customers.
Great advice. Okay.
Can we actually, there's actually something that I mentioned in the introduction that, by the way, Kara wrote, so I'm going to throw her under the bus if you're offended by it. I said, like, there's a cult-like following, right, behind Mejuri, and I actually really do believe this. What is it like to be a cult leader? But let me actually like taper that question down a little bit. It's a bit of a joke, which is just like, when I open like a Mejuri box for the first time, is there like a very specific kind of emotion that you're trying to make me feel? And how does that translate into like that kind of loyalty where I feel compelled to stay with you for a long time and share with the world?
So I guess just to answer on the following in the community, one of the key ingredients for us is we all, it's very important for me. Mejuri on the inside is Mejuri on the outside. So it becomes very intuitive for us to create a community that is, and we have a genuine connection with them. So if you walk into our office, it does feel like our Instagram, it does feel like our emails, our tone of voice, the way that everything about us on the inside is equal to the outside. So that is very key in creating a genuine relationship with our community. And there are instances when we say, if you can't say this sentence to your friend, then don't post it, because that's exactly how we want to talk to our community. We don't want to be the teacher. We want to be, the friend who knows a little bit more about jewelry. And so obviously, I hope that when people are receiving the boxes, that they feel they're treating themselves. And this is a space where, that they had bought something that reminds them of something positive, and that when they open it, they fall in love with it. And so for me, it's super important that we say make luxury a habit, and taking care of yourself is really important, and prioritize that, because I think oftentimes we think that taking care of yourself is a little bit selfish, but we're trying to put the message on invest in yourself so you can become a better leader, a better mother, a better person. And so that comes through our ads as well. I think I went on tangent here, but I'm super passionate about the investment and in our ads for my damn self. And so when people receive this, I want them to feel like this is amazing and I appreciate myself, or I appreciate the person that I gave this gift to, and it's very thoughtful.
Wow, I want to sort of signal boost. I think interpretation of what you just shared with me is just, a lot of the companies I speak to, when they think about voice, is just like, what do I think would resonate with the audience, right? To essentially make the most money, I think is first principle behind it. But you're sort of arguing just like, it's like, that's faking it too much. Like it's going to be perceived perhaps as inauthentic. Is that like one way to interpret what you're saying?
100%. So literally in our brand book, we have what is the Mejuri brand? What are the components? What are we? What are we not? And so there's a sense of humor in our communication, for example, that is intentional. Like it's something that, again, it's what's on the inside is the outside. And it's exactly what you said. If you try to fake it, if you try to have a marketing spin on it, it just feels different. And so that's the really key. It has to feel very natural.
Pretty contrarian, because fake it till you make it has been a Silicon Valley mantra for quite some time. You're fighting that. That's cool.
Well, and actually building on that, Noura, I mean, given that you're creating this emotion, right, through the purchase and through the customer experience, one thing I've seen here on our Q&A, and what I'm curious as well, how do you drive retention and repurchases, given that jewelry is not necessarily like a natural repeat sales cycle, right? So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's different components apart from the Monday drop, what that allows us to do. So our jewelry is designed to be worn every day and to be stacked as well. And so you'll see me, I'm wearing 2 necklaces. There's piercings that we do. I'm scared of needles, so I have only 2. And there's bracelets. So there's the styling component that is very important for us. And so that obviously drives repeat. And for me, fashion has become very basic. And I love the fact that we all, wear black, white, neutral, etc. And so jewelry and these small details become part of your identity and who you are. And so, and we're seeing this, this is driving also this customization behavior in your stack and your style. So that is one component. Then the other component is we're seeing also gifting, and not just the traditional gifting, not your Valentine's and holidays. We're also seeing birthdays across the year, or during COVID, thinking of you in this tough time. And so people are looking at jewelry because we're becoming also more conscious on what we're buying. And if you're buying, a 14 karat product, it should last a lifetime. And so, when you're gifting yourself or you're gifting others, you're becoming more conscious right now that we're thinking a lot more about, what's happening. And so I think that jewelry in the past few months has been also a choice for a lot of people for gifting. So people come back, whether be it for themselves or for gifts as well.
I love that. I especially think it's great that how the products go together, right? So you get one and then you're like, oh, wait, but I want this other thing to go with it. It's going to make it look, it's going to amplify the value to other people or to myself or both. Yeah. Okay, cool. I know we only have a few minutes left. There's so many people who are curious about your influencer partnerships, which we dove into a little bit. But if people are first getting started with influencer marketing, what's like step one? There's a lot of questions here around, is there something that I can do to convince them to work with me besides just giving them like a code to share? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, right now, the landscape is very different. I don't know that my advice would be super relevant because we're not starting right now, but I do realize that it's quite competitive and also can be very costly. But I go back to not focusing necessarily on the very large influencers and go into micro influencers who have very direct relationships and closer relationships with their community. And then, and they a lot of the smaller influencers also are just starting out, and find those who have passion towards your brand. And so I think that would be my piece of advice of where I would start. And that's why I said it's not just about the number of followers, it's about are they close to their community, and can they contextualize the brand in the way that you want it? So there has to be some things in common. And I would not make it super transactional, meaning that I would look for a longer term partnership with the same person. And so that's also, I'm sure that can create also some sort of a relationship.
I'd love to hover on one comment you just shared there, Noura. So you said, how are they engaging? Like, are they close to their community? Were there signals that you're looking for that prove that to you?
Yeah, it was very important for us to see that their community is asking questions, they're talking to them, they're engaging with the content, that they're talking about things that are, very important for us, values that are very important for us, outside of, let's say, just styling, for example. Styling is very important, but there's other components that we really care about. So we were looking at those aspects, and we continue to look at those aspects.
Okay, this is off topic, throwing a curveball here, but Alexandra had a great question around your return rate. How do you manage the logistics of the high number of returns when people can't try products on first? Did you use pop-ups at all, or was there another strategy that you explored?
Like actual people returning a product?
Correct.
So we're actually, with jewelry, the key thing, or the easier thing than regular fashion, is sizing isn't necessarily an issue. So I would say our return rate is quite lower than what you would see in the fashion industry, because it's not a sizing component. We do have 6 stores right now. So the stores do help a lot with people who feel a little bit of, doubt or wanting to see the product. But I don't think it's a sticking point, quite frankly.
When in the journey did you start exploring brick and mortar?
We were 3 years in. 3 years in, I think 2017, we did our first showroom through demand by our customers. They wanted to come and see the products, and it was a happy accident, I should say. And now retail is a really, really key channel for us. Obviously, we had to slow down on our plans this year because of COVID. But we're now in New York, Toronto, Austin, Boston, San Francisco, and LA.
Oh, great. That's close to me, so I'm excited to hear that. And I guess one other question, and this goes back a little bit to hiring, but I've seen it twice, so I think it's worth asking. For some of the roles that are maybe like with less sexy titles than marketing or product or design, like supply chain, how did you go about finding the right people for those roles?
Oh, there's people who love this. I love supply chain. But how did we go about doing it? That's a specialized role. So you have to find someone in that field. Like, this is not something you can have a generalist on a supply chain function or a planning and purchasing function. And what we've done in the beginning is we've hired people with high potential who can grow and stay with the business. And so that is a key. You don't have to hire the most senior person because you're still figuring things out. So you hire someone with a lot of potential to grow and a very solid, knowledge or technical knowledge in that field, and then they grow with you.
And this is something you knew. These were roles that you knew you wanted to hire for in the beginning. Is that correct? Because you knew you wanted to own the whole process?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, I mean, there's so many more questions. I know we're coming up on time, but Eric, do I have time for one more before we have to say goodbye?
I think so.
Okay, wonderful. So we have some people here in the audience who are investors or who are looking to get into being angel investors. Is there, you had an interesting journey in that you bootstrapped first and then raised. Yeah. But I guess when you were looking at possible investors, what attracted you to the investors? What can investors do to get involved in companies like yours?
For me, it was really key that I'm with someone who understands the value of brand. I don't want to cut corners, and so a brand is not like a SaaS company, so it will take time to grow. It will take different investments, and so that was key for me to be aligned with the investors who realize. But it's a big equity. If you build a brand, you build something amazing, but it's not going to scale as fast. And so that was very key for me, is someone who believes in the power of brand. And for me personally, every single investor we brought from Series A, Series B were people I had spent time with. So I had started talking to them months and months before we actually needed the money. That's my personal preference, just because I like to know who I'm working with and, how are they when things are good or when things are tough. And so, someone who wants to act as a partner as opposed to wants an exit or something like that. These are key things for me personally.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm going to hold back all my other questions. I know we're at time. Thank you for answering so many of those, Noura.
Thank you.
That's so great. For those of you who joined a little bit late, we've been speaking to Noura Sakkijha. She's the co-founder and CEO of Mejuri, a really amazing direct-to-consumer jewelry brand. I just flashed their website here, so definitely check out mejuri.com. Really amazingly done website. I think I have the next place and I'm going to figure out my wife's birthday gift. So thank you for solving that for me, Noura. And again, we couldn't make this session possible without the support of NetSuite. So thank you very much. Check out netsuite.com for some pretty important platform decisions in running your business. And thank you so much for joining. Noura, it's been great to chat with you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you so much, Eric and Thira. It was a pleasure talking to you both.
All right, all the best. Stay safe, everyone. Take it easy. Bye-bye.